Chapter 10, Living with Asymmetry. Opening Lines of Communication. An American woman set out for a vacation cruise and landed in a Turkish prison. Reading her book, Never Pass This Way Again, I could see that Jean Lapierre's ordeal was an extreme example of the disastrous consequences that can result from cross-cultural differences in what I term conversational style, ways of framing how you mean what you say, and what you think you are doing when you say it. Lapierre's experience also illustrates, in an unusually dramatic way, the dangers of trying to avoid conflict and say no in a polite way. Lapierre left her cruise ship for a brief tour of ancient ruins in Turkey. At an archaeological site, she fell behind her group as she became absorbed in admiring the ruins. Suddenly, her path was blocked by a man selling artifacts she had no interest in buying. Yet she found herself holding a stone head, and when she told him politely that she did not want it, he would not take it back. Instead, he thrust forward another one, which she also automatically accepted. Since the man would not take either head back, the only path to escape she could envision was offering to buy them. She cut his price in half and hoped he'd refuse so she could move on. Instead, he agreed to drop the price, and she dropped the two heads into her tote. But as she handed him the money, he handed her a third head. Once more she insisted that she did not want it, but he just stepped back to avoid repossessing it. Seeing no alternative, she paid for the third head and stalked off, shaken and angry. When Lapierre tried to reboard her cruise ship, she showed her purchases to customs officials, who had her arrested and thrown into jail for trying to smuggle out a national treasure. The third head was a genuine antiquity. Having lived in Greece and observed the verbal art of bargaining, I could see that talking to the vendor and saying that she did not want the artifacts would mean to him that she might want them if the price were lower. If she really had no intention of buying, she would not have talked to him at all. She would have pushed her way past him and walked on, never establishing eye contact, and surely not taking possession of any heads, no matter how insistently he proffered them. Each time she accepted a head, he received evidence of her interest and encouragement to offer another. Each step in his increasingly aggressive sales pitch was a response to what likely appeared to him as her bargaining maneuvers. Refusing to look at or talk to him, or as a last resort, placing the heads on the ground. These were unthinkable alternatives for a polite American woman. Lapierre paid dearly for this fleeting breakdown in communication across cultures. Though cross-cultural communication between women and men generally has less drastic consequences, the process of incremental misunderstanding by which it occurs is similar. And in a way, male-female miscommunication is more dangerous because it is more pervasive in our lives, and we are less prepared for it. We expect differences when we talk to people who come from different countries. We have ways to think about such differences like customs and cultural assumptions. But we don't expect family, friends, co-workers, and romantic partners who grew up in the same culture and speak the same language to understand words differently and have different views of the world. But often they do. Why things get worse. Jean Lapierre's experience illustrates the process that Gregory Bateson identified and named complementary schismogenesis, a mutually aggravating spiral by which each person's response to the other's behavior provokes more exaggerated forms of the divergent behavior. Lapierre's mounting frustration with the vendor's hard sell practices resulted in behavior that encouraged him to step them up. For example, she offered a low price for the two heads because she had no interest in buying them. But from his point of view, this was a show of interest and willingness to participate in the bargaining process. So, what she did to escape the situation only further embroiled her in it. Complementary seismogenesis commonly sets in when women and men have divergent sensitivities and hypersensitivities. For example, a man who fears losing freedom pulls away at the first sign he interprets as an attempt to control him. But pulling away is just the signal that sets off alarms for the woman who fears losing intimacy. Her attempts to get closer will aggravate his fear, and his reaction, pulling further away, will aggravate hers, and so on in an ever widening spiral. Understanding each other's style and the motives behind them is a first move in breaking this destructive circuit. Inequality begins at home. Another reason that gender differences are so much more troubling than other cross cultural differences is that they occur where the home and hearth are. We all sense that stepping into a vastly foreign culture involves risk. That's why there is a thrill of adventure associated with foreign travel. But we expect to be safe in our own homes, and there we expect to be equal. Sociologist Ervin Goffman points out that inequality due to differences in race and ethnicity disappears when people of the same race or ethnic background close the doors to their own homes. But in private, personal spaces that we cherish as havens from the outside world, inequality based on gender comes into its own. Not only do we not escape such discrimination in our most intimate relationships, but we can hardly conceive of them apart from gender based alignments that are inherently asymmetrical, implying differences in status. We cannot take a step without taking stances that are prescribed by society and gender specific. We enact and create our gender and our inequality with every move we make. Physical constellations. A man and a woman showing mutual affection cannot do it in the same way. When a man and a woman walk down the street embracing, his arm is around her shoulders and her arm rests on his waist. If their stance is more casual, his hand may rest in his pocket as she holds onto his arm. These stances are not symmetrical. If a woman walks with her arm around a man's shoulders and his arm around her waist, passers-by look back in a double take. If a woman keeps her hands in her pockets while a man hooks his hand onto her arm, or she has her arm on the shoulder of a man who has his hands in his pockets, chances are the woman is a mother and the male is her child. Some people point out that men put their arms on women's shoulders, not the reverse, because the man is usually taller. So it would be uncomfortable, if not impossible, for the woman and man to reverse positions. But these rituals are observed even if the man is not taller and must stretch to maintain the protective position. If he is too short to put his arm around the woman's shoulders, they will not reverse positions, but settle for holding hands. Moreover, our society expects the man to be taller and older and richer and smarter, precisely because this frames him as protective and higher in status. The asymmetry of women's and men's alignment is epitomized in the positions they take. The most intimate moments cannot be imagined without reference to gender. When a woman and a man lie down on a blanket or in bed, he typically lies on his back, flat and straight, while she lies on her side, with her body curved and nestled against his. Her head rests on his shoulder, his arm is around her. Daily, men and women take these positions automatically. and their ritualized nature is a source of comfort. It feels right and good, partly because it is personally familiar and partly because it mirrors a configuration we have seen countless times in pictures and in life. But reenacting the ritual also reinforces the asymmetry of relationship, as he is solid, firm, protecting, and she is off balance, off centered, protected. A poet, Cheryl Romney Brown, created a poem around the recurrent image of a woman burying her face in the crook of a man's neck. She shows that this gesture recurs throughout a woman's life. In the crook of his neck, fine hairs on his shoulders gleam, like epaulets reminding me of silk. Mulberry threads Penelope used for tapestries spun waiting for her hero to come home. We women always long for men to step out of a myth or a Marlboro ad. It begins all over again as he caresses my back. I inhale the scent, begin to relax. Once more, I become a defenseless girl wanting only to close my eyes, bury my head in the crook of his neck. How old was I the first time? Possibly 3, it happened. When Daddy came home, please hold me, protect me. Werewolves are out, their eyes burning hot. If you don't, I know I will die. I close my eyes, buried my head in the crook of his neck. When I was 16, ripe but pure, down by the arbor on a hot summer night, my first beau's lips brushed mine, my hero. Your Juliet's here, pink tulle bound. My heart, I closed my eyes, buried my head in the crook of his neck. I am a grown woman, mother of men. Experience fades, memory stills. If only for a moment I am saved. My hero is here for maybe an hour, willing to do battle, killing all my foes. Illusions, myths, whatever is true. I close my eyes, bury my head in the crook of his neck. Romney Brown's poem captures the childlike nature of the asymmetrical embrace by which a woman places her head on a man's shoulder, nestling against him, and its protective meaning. The poet traces this delicious feeling of being protected to her relationship to her father when she was a child. Presumably, a little boy might also have nestled against his father or mother, seeking solace and protection. But as an adult, the woman is still taking the child's position in the constellation, while the man has moved into the position taken by the parent. This poem also captures the automatic way a woman moves into the protected position with men who are not literally protecting her. The standard tableau is immutably in place, ready for the young girl to take her position in it on her first date, and still there, half a lifetime later, for her to step into after divorce. The woman's role in this ritual configuration is resumed even when she has long since she has proven her ability to protect others, as the mother of men. The rigidity of these ritual constellations is portrayed in a pivotal scene in the film The Accidental Tourist. The hero, Macon, appears disheveled and distraught at the home of Muriel, a woman who has shown a romantic interest in him. Macon tells Muriel the dreadful story of his son's death and confesses that he has been unable to recover from it. Touched by his confession, Muriel leads Macon to bed to comfort him for his devastating loss. In bed, Macon lies on his back and lifts his arm to place it around Muriel, who snuggles against him. In choreographing this scene, the director apparently felt that the demands of convention, which require the man to take the physical position of comforter and protector, were stronger than the demands of the immediate scene in which Muriel is comforting Macon. The physical alignment that men and women take up to each other when they lie down together is just one of a network of asymmetries that enact our genders and simultaneously reinforce status differences between men and women. Goffman is eloquent in describing these asymmetries. In our society, in all classes, the tenderest expression of affection involves displays that are politically questionable. The place taken up in them by the female being differentiated from and reciprocal to the place taken up by the male. Cross-sex affectional gestures choreograph protector and protected, embracer and embraced, comforter and comforted, supporter and supported, extender of affection and recipient thereof, and it is defined only natural that the male encompass and the female be encompassed. And this can only remind us that male domination is a very special kind, a domination that can be carried right into the gentlest, most loving moment without apparently causing strain. Indeed, these moments can hardly be conceived of apart from these asymmetries. Gender is a category that will not go away. As Kaufman put it is one of the most deeply seated traits of man as we create masculinity and femininity in our ways of behaving, all the while believing that we are simply acting naturally. But our sense of what is natural is different for men and women, and what we regard as naturally male and female is based on asymmetrical alignments. In Kaufman's terms, gendered relations are patterned on the parent-child complex. In other words, the ways we enact our genders as we try to be good women and men take on meaning by analogy with parents and children. Kaufman points out that men are to women as adults are to children. Loving protectors who will hold open doors, offer the first portion of sweets, reach high shelves, and lift heavy loads. But along with the privileges of childhood come liabilities. Children's activities are interruptible, their time and territory expendable. Along with the privilege of being protected comes the loss of rights and not being respected and treated like a full-fledged person. Being the protector frames someone as competent, capable, and deserving of respect. Being protected frames one as incompetent, incapable, and deserving of indulgence. Asymmetries in conversation. I only did it for you. In talking to couple about communication in their relationships, I was surprised by how often men referred to their role as protectors of women in explaining why they spoke as they did. For example, one couple told me of a recent argument. The woman had noticed that her husband was favoring one arm and asked why. He said that his arm hurt. She asked how long it had been hurting him, and he said, "Oh, a few weeks." To his surprise, she reacted with hurt and anger. "Go ahead, treat me like a stranger." To her, intimacy meant telling her what's on your mind, including what hurts. By not telling her that his arm hurt, her husband was pushing her away, distancing her with his silence. I instinctively understood this woman's point of view, but I did not immediately understand the man's. In explaining his side of the story, he said, "I guess men learned from the beginning to protect women." This puzzled me. I asked what protection had to do with not telling his wife that his arm hurt. "I was protecting her," he explained. "Why should I worry her by telling her about my pain, since it might be nothing and go away anyway?" Deciding what to tell his wife reflects this man's perceived role as her protector, but it also grows out of and reinforces the alignment by which he is in a superior position. He is stronger than she, and he has power to cause her worry by the information he imparts. This man does not feel as his wife perceives that he is trying to curtail their intimacy. Intimacy is simply not at issue for him. In her world, the imparting of personal information is the fundamental material of intimacy. So, withholding such information deprives her of the closeness that is her lifeblood. Their different interpretations of the same information simply reflect their different preoccupations. They are tuned to different frequencies. It may be that this man was also protecting his autonomy, staving off his wife's excessive show of concern. But this was not the reason he offered in explaining his motives. In his explanatory system, his role as protector was primary. The same was true for another husband, whose wife complained of a very different type of behavior. The wife, whom I will call Michelle, objected to the habit her husband, Gary, had of answering her questions by providing information other than what she had requested. Here are two typical exchanges that she recounted. Michelle: what time is the concert? Gary: you have to be ready by 7:30. Michelle: how many people are coming to the dinner? Gary: don't worry, there'll be enough food. Michelle gets frustrated because she feels that by withholding information, Gary is holding tight to the reins of power in the relationship. But he maintains that he is watching out for her by getting to the real point of her questions. Both points of view are plausible. The cause of their different interpretations of the same conversation resides in the ambiguity inherent in protecting. He sees his attention to her concerns as protective. She sees that the protective stance frames him as one up in competence and control. Another man reported similar conversation with his wife. In this case, however, the roles are reversed. It is the wife, Valerie, who gives what she thinks is the relevant information, rather than answering the question asked. And it is the husband, Ned, who objects to her doing so. Here are two examples of their dialogues. Ned: are you leaving now? Valerie: you can take a nap if you want. Ned: are you just about finished? Valerie: do you want to have supper now? In defending herself against Ned's complaints, Valerie gives an explanation very different from the one given by the husband in the previous example. She says that she is anticipating Ned's desires and concerns. This man and woman give different explanations for behaving in the same way. They truly seem to think of themselves as doing the same thing for different reasons. Being the protector is central to him. Being helpful is central to her. If men and women sometimes have or give different motivations when they behave in similar ways, there are also situations where their different motivations lead them to behave differently. Each individual works out a unique way of balancing status differences and connection to others. But if we think of these motivations as two ends of a continuum, men and women tend to cluster at opposite ends. Because of these differences in points of view, a man and a woman may perceive the same scene in different ways and misinterpret each other's motives. Understanding the differences can deflect the misinterpretation and make sense where there seemed to be no sense. Solving puzzles. A man told me with puzzlement about his most rebellious childhood friend, Henry. Henry flouted authority at every turn, in the way he wore his hair, sticking straight out in all directions, the way he dressed flamboyantly, absurdly, the things he did, making crank phone calls, publicly ridiculing teachers, the way he planned his future. He refused to go to college. Instead, he left the country. But several years later, Henry returned to the United States, transformed into a traditionalist. For example, he insisted that friends who visited him must bring their wives, because wives were supposed to accompany their husbands everywhere, and his political views became more and more conservative. The rebellious youth who turns into an authoritarian adult is a commonly observed paradox. I recall being surprised at first to hear Charlotte Lynn's observation that policemen whose conversations she had studied talked frequently about what bad boys they had been, trading stories about their youthful escapades and how cleverly they had broken the law in their wild days. This seeming puzzle returned to me, the pieces now fitting together as I came to understand the view of the world as a hierarchical social order. Born rebels who defy authority are not oblivious of it, but oversensitive to it. Defying authority is a way of asserting themselves and refusing to accept the subordinate position. When they are old enough or established enough to take the dominant position, reinforcing authority becomes the way to assert themselves, since the hierarchy is now operating to their advantage. Another puzzle solved for me was my similarities to and differences from my father. For example, my father passed on to me his love of reading and of words. "What book are you reading?" he regularly asked me when I was a child. But I was disappointed when, as a young adult, I recommended to him some of the novels I loved, and he couldn't get through them. "It's so boring," he'd say. "Nothing ever happens." And he never could get me to read some of the books he loved when he was a child. For example, The Three Musketeers. And as an adult, for example, The Maltese Falcon. Like most men, my father is interested in action. And this is why he also disappoints my mother when she tells him she doesn't feel well and he offers to take her to the doctor. He is focused on what he can do, whereas she wants sympathy. Two paths to involvement. Offering sympathy and offering to do something can be different ways of achieving the same goal: involvement with others. All conversations serve the universal human need for involvement as well as the simultaneous but conflicting need for independence. And just as men and women often have contrasting senses of intimacy, so also do they often have contrasting senses of independence. Those who see relationships as fundamentally hierarchical will feel that to be independent, they must be dominant rather than subordinate. But another view is possible. It is possible to avoid being dependent on or subordinate to others, but not dominate them either. In other words, there is a symmetrical rather than asymmetrical independence. That these two views reflect characteristically male and female views of independence is supported by Philip Blumstein and Pepper Schwartz's study, American Couples. A husband they quote as typical said he needs to be independent and to have others dependent on him. This is an outgrowth of the protector stance that is built into our society's sense of what it means to be masculine. The difference between men's and women's assumptions about independence also emerges in their attitudes toward money. Blumstein and Schwartz found that for men, having money provides a sense of power, but for women, it provides security and autonomy, simply the ability not to be dependent. An intriguing result of their comparison of heterosexual and homosexual couples is that only among lesbian couples did earning more money not establish a partner as relatively more powerful in the relationship. Lesbians, they found, use money to avoid dependence but not to dominate. And only among gay male couples did one partner feel more successful if the other partner's income was lower. When strengths become liabilities. These differing understandings of independence grow out of the distinct kinds of relations men and women learn and practice as boys and girls growing up. And these disparate worlds exert distinct pressures on each gender. The pressure to maintain connections with others while appearing skillful and knowledgeable, and while negotiating relative rank can become a burden for boys and men. The pressure to achieve status while avoiding conflict and appearing no better than anyone else can become a burden for women and girls. Women sometimes suffer from an overabundance of rapport. For example, their expectation that an expression of trouble should be met with matching troubles can be felt as a stringent requirement to have matching troubles to tell. One woman said of a friend, "Marianne tries to rope me into her neuroses," implying I have the same problems she does. I don't like it because I don't have the same problems. A similar frustration was expressed by another woman, Jill, who told me about her friend, Elizabeth, who always includes her in her statements. "We have trouble with this," or "That's a problem for us." When Elizabeth issues an inclusive statement, she expects Jill to come up with a matching experience. If Jill says, "That's not a problem for me," Elizabeth feels rejected and accuses Jill of putting her down. "Some women don't let you be different," Jill said. "They don't let you have any individuality." If women are not always perfectly satisfied by their friendships with women, neither are all men perfectly happy with their friendships with men. Many men told me that they prefer women as friends because they find it harder to talk to men. One man told me it took him 2 years in a new city to find two men who were willing to talk about how they felt, to admit problems and listen to his. Men he did not feel were competitive with him. Men's need to be independent and strong all the time can be felt as a stringent requirement not to have troubles. This was the view expressed to Catherine Kohler Reisman by a divorced man who said, "I think everybody hates to have anybody know that they have problems. You always try and keep your problems to yourself." Several men commented to me that it is American men in particular who make friendly conversation into a contest. One British man told me that back home his best friends had been men, but since he emigrated to the United States, most of his friends have been women. On a visit home, he spent time with an old friend who was male. "We yielded to one another," he said, explaining to me what the difference was. "We didn't try to one up or prevail all the time." An American man expressed a similar opinion. He said he finds European men easier to talk to. "Talking to American men," he commented, "is like a war zone." And yet the man who told me it had taken him 2 years to find men to befriend did find two. And everyone knows men and women who, in some ways, are like the other gender than like their own. It is natural, since individuals develop patterns of behavior based on innumerable influences, such as where they grew up, ethnic background, religious or cultural affiliation, caste, and the vast reservoir of personal experience and genetic inheritance that make each person's life and personality unique. But seeing a pattern against which to evaluate individual differences provides a starting point to develop not only self-understanding but also flexibility, the freedom to try doing things differently if automatic ways of doing them aren't having entirely successful results. Both men and women can benefit from learning each other's styles. Many women can learn from men to accept some conflict and difference without seeing it as a threat to intimacy. And many men could learn from women to accept interdependence without seeing it as a threat to their freedom. Women's inclination to preserve intimacy by avoiding conflict also explains the initially surprising finding of Blumstein and Schwartz that women want more time away from their partners than men do. I think there are two reasons for this. First, many women have a kind of communication with their women friends that they don't have with their partners, and that is not possible if their partners are present. Second, when women are with partners, they make more adjustments and accommodations, buying harmony at the cost of their own preferences. Therefore, being with partners is more of a strain on them than it is on men, who are less inclined to accommodate. If accommodating automatically is a strain, so is automatically resisting others' will. Sometimes it is more effective to take the footing of an ally. The best style is a flexible one. The freest person is the one who can choose which strategies to use, not the one who must slavishly replay the same script over and over, as we all tend to do. There is nothing inherently wrong with automatic behavior. If we did not do most things automatically, it would take massive concentration and energy to do anything. But by becoming aware of our ways of talking and how effective they are, we can override our automatic impulses and adapt our habitual styles when they are not serving us well. It all depends. In trying to develop such awareness of ways of talking, people often ask me what a particular expression or conversational habit really means. I always answer that no device or phrase has only one meaning. Like the practice of overlapping, beginning to talk when someone else is already speaking, what looks on the surface like the same way of talking can have varied meanings and effects. A listener may talk along with a speaker to provide support or to change the topic. Even changing the topic can have a range of meanings. It can show lack of interest, it can be an attempt to dominate the conversation, or it can be a kind of mutual revelation device, matching the speaker's experience with the listener's. Even mutual revelation can be done with different motives, either in a spirit of connection to establish rapport and emphasize sameness, or in a spirit of competition to top a story and frame oneself as more important. Evidence that the same behavior can have very different meanings emerges in an article by Lee Cronk comparing gift giving in different cultures. Citing an African example, in the words of a young man named Zoma, Haxaro is when I take a thing of value and give it to you. Later, much later, when you find some good thing, you give it back to me. When I find something good, I will give it to you, and so we will pass the years together. Ask what would count as a fair exchange. For example, how many strings of beads would you have to give if your friend gave you a spear? Zoma wouldn't answer. He explained that any return would be acceptable. Because we don't trade with things, we trade with people. In contrast, a New Guinea society has a custom called mocha, by which gifts are given to gain prestige and shame rivals. One legendary mocha gift given in the 1970s included several hundred pigs, some cows, and wild birds, a truck, a motorbike, and thousands of dollars in cash. The person who gave all this is said to have told the person he gave it to, I have won. I have knocked you down by giving so much. In these two cultural rituals, the same act, giving gifts, has very different meanings. Haxaro, done among friends, is cooperative, whereas Mocha, done among rivals, is competitive. The key difference between these two practices is symmetry versus asymmetry. In Haxaro, the exchange of gifts is symmetrical, each friend reciprocating with a matching gift. But in Mocha, it is asymmetrical, each rival trying to top the other's gifts so he can come out on top. Since any action or statement can grow out of widely divergent motives and intentions, It is not safe to trust our instincts about what a comment or action means. A young person might have a very different instinctive reaction to a gift than a member of a New Guinea tribe that practices mocha. This awareness can be a key to improving conversations and relationships among women and men. We would all do well to distrust our automatic responses to what others say, especially if our automatic responses are negative. Instead, we should try to see things from the other person's perspective. Once they know that women and men often have different assumptions about the world and about the ways of talking, people are very creative about figuring out how this rift is affecting their own relationships. Opening lines of communication. Many experts tell us we are doing things wrong and should change our behavior, which usually sounds easier than it turns out to be. Sensitivity training judges men by women's standards, trying to get them to talk more like women. Assertiveness training judges women by men's standards and tries to get them to talk more like men. No doubt, many people can be helped by learning to be more sensitive or more assertive. But few people are helped by being told they are doing everything all wrong. And there may be little wrong with what people are doing, even if they are winding up in arguments. The problem may be that each partner is operating within a different system, speaking a different genderlect. An obvious question is, can genderlect be taught? Can people change their conversational styles? If they want to, yes, they can to an extent. But those who ask this question rarely want to change their own styles. Usually, what they have in mind is sending their partners for repair. They'd like to get him or her to change. Changing one's own style is far less appealing because it is not just how you act, but who you feel yourself to be. Therefore, a more realistic approach is to learn how to interpret each other's messages and explain your own in a way your partner can understand and accept. Understanding genderlects makes it possible to change, to try speaking differently when you want to. But even if no one changes, understanding genderlects improves relationships. Once people realize that their partners have different conversational styles, they are inclined to accept differences without blaming themselves, their partners, or their relationships. The biggest mistake is believing there is one right way to listen, to talk, to have a conversation, or a relationship. Nothing hurts more than being told your intentions are bad when you know they are good, or being told you are doing something wrong when you know you are just doing it your way. Not seeing style differences for what they are, people draw conclusions about personality. You're illogical, you're insecure, you're self centered, or intentions, you don't listen, you put me down. Understanding style differences for what they are takes the sting out of them. Believing that you're not interested in me, you don't care about me as much as I care about you, or you want to take away my freedom feels awful. Believing that you have a different way of showing you're listening or showing you care allows for no fault negotiation. You can ask for or make adjustments without casting or taking blame. If you understand gender differences in what I call conversational style, you may not be able to prevent disagreements from arising, but you stand a better chance of preventing them from spiraling out of control. When sincere attempts to communicate end in stalemate and a beloved partner seems irrational and obstinate, the different languages men and women speak can shake the foundation of our lives. Understanding the other's ways of talking is a giant leap across the communication gap between men and women. and a giant step toward opening lines of communication.